Good morning and a warm welcome to the We Don't Have Time Davos Hub. We're live here for the third day in a row from the beautiful outside of the Arctic Basecamp, located in front of the Berghotel Schatzalp. And today we're going to talk about a very disturbing and sort of worrying topic. We're going to talk about, is there a risk that the climate crisis, the current developments, the recent ones that are really extra alarming, is there a risk they will trigger a new financial crisis? And of course, this is sadly grounded in the current fires and the events, natural disasters that have been taking place this year globally in different areas. And the 1.5-degree world we are currently experiencing, of course, brings all these natural disasters already. So how will this affect the financial system? And is there a possibility that the weather events, the extreme weather events, and all the consequences following them will really trigger this crisis? So here to help us navigate this fairly difficult question is the wonderful panel. I have with me Tim Lenton, Chair in Climate Change and Earth System Science, University of Exeter. Terrific to have you with us. And next was Ingmar Renshaug, CEO and founder of We Don't Have Time. And Nandini Wilke, founder and CEO of Carbon Pool, sitting next to Ingmar. Terrific to have you with us here and outside the Arctic Basecamp. And Delphine Kenyar, Executive Director, Bankers Without Borders. Wonderful to see you here also. And Johan Falk, Exponential Roadmap Initiative, Executive Director, CEO and co-founder. So this is a tricky question that we're going to dig in deeper here today, but it's really important. And let me kickstart by addressing you, Professor Lenton. You're an expert in what we might call the big picture impacts of climate change and the risks, of course. So could you please set the stage, as it were, in terms of really the risks that we're facing here?
Absolutely. We're right in the middle still of an extraordinary climate event in the sense of prolonged warming of a magnitude and a duration that we just weren't expecting and still can't fully explain as scientists. So we've been sat at 1.5 or more degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial level for well over a year now. And what's come with that is a bunch of extreme events, most recently those extraordinary fires in LA. And then in the bigger picture, the biggest risk we're facing is that we cross what are called tipping points in the climate system, where we destabilize major parts of the climate system, tipping them into a different state with a whole host of impacts for us. And that ranges from committing the loss of major ice sheets and accelerated sea level rise of a magnitude that eventually could total 10 meters, redraw the coastlines of the world, through to much faster responding tipping points like the risk that we tip changes in the circulation of the Atlantic Ocean that will both radically change the seasonality of the climate in around the North Atlantic region, but also could seriously disrupt the monsoons in the tropics, causing humanitarian crises. And then in between that, you've got the biosphere. You've major tipping point risks to major ecosystems like the Amazon rainforest or the coral reefs in the tropics that 500 million people depend on for their livelihoods. All of these systems are increasing risk of being, for every 0.1 degrees centigrade, we increase global warming. And we're struggling to rule out that we're not at the tipping point for a few of these systems that would have really major impacts.
This is, of course, deeply alarming on many levels. So what could you say about the risks connected to this affecting the global economy and more specifically the financial systems?
Well, the financial system, I think, has been working with the wrong scenarios of climate change. Those scenarios are rapidly being revised. They're from something called the Network for Greening the Financial System, or NGFS. But in their first iteration, they essentially said the impact of climate change are just going to be a few percent of GDP, which in simple terms means they're lost in the news of the difficulty in measuring that thing. Whereas actually us climate scientists would say, no, we're running sort of many tens of percent of loss of GDP at even relatively low levels of warming, the sort of levels that the current global government commitments would take us to later this century, 2.5, 3 degrees of warming. So there's a definitely, you'd say, unpriced risk in a financial sense.
And thank you very much for spelling this out so clearly, Tim Fenton. I'm turning to Nandini. Nandini, your organization Carbon Pool, you work with insuring carbon credits. So could you tell us a bit about what that means, carbon credits? Because maybe not all of our viewers are familiar with the term.
Carbon credits are credits. A single credit is awarded for a ton of CO2 either avoided, so not emitted into the atmosphere, or removed from the atmosphere. A carbon credit is a unit that represents that ton of CO2 that is avoided or reduced. What we do, Carbon Pool, is we ensure that carbon credits that are expected to be delivered from nature-based projects, let's say from the planting of a forest, do actually materialize. Let's say you are a carbon credit project developer in the Amazon, for example. The professor just mentioned that the Amazon is one of those places. There's a lot of reforestation and afforestation efforts going to combat the deforestation. If you are engaged in a reforestation project in the Amazon, you often enter into forward contracts with purchasers looking to buy carbon credits to offset their unavoidable emissions. Now, if there is an event that compromises the forest, if there's a drought, or if there's a rainstorm, or if there's a fire, and those carbon credits don't get reduced, then our insurance covers you with a payment in carbon and not in cash. And the reason that that's important is because cash isn't going to make the climate whole. Cash is not going to help the buyer of those carbon credits actually achieve the impact that they're doing. Why have we done this? We do this because we urgently want to drive capital into removing and avoiding carbon from the atmosphere. And that capital isn't going to come if banks who are funding the money or equity investors have no assurance that it will happen. Insurance is obviously critical in to the stability of the financial system. And one of the things I think we're seeing most recently with LA, LA will be the costliest climate disaster, it seems, in the history of the United States. A lot of that is uninsured. Why is it insured? It's because insurers started leaving California and Florida a long time ago. Yet there's also been, from politicians, I'm afraid, a bit of subsidizing of insurance premiums and cap on insurance rates that have made it not possible for insurance premiums to really reflect the underlying risk. So if your insurance premium continues to be affordable when you go to build your house in a wildfire zone, you are going to build your house in the wildfire zone. And that's absolutely what you should not be doing. This is also why we're trying to innovate in insurance and to price the risk properly. So if someone sets up an afforestation project, I want my insurance to reflect the risk and cost of that project versus a different one, because I want climate dollars to go where they're actually going to have impact.
Thank you very much, Nandini. So if you're coming from this question, of course, obviously from the insurance perspective. So could you give us a little bit more insight on how the insurance sector can adapt? You shared some of your thoughts, but how do you convey to the other players in the insurance industry how to adapt to this scenario?
First of all, I think the climate, I almost hate to use the word crisis, because it is a crisis, of course, but it almost suggests that passing thing. Climate change is a phenomenon that has been with us and is going to continue to be with us. And I think insurance companies need to innovate. I think insurance companies need to be forward thinking and actually using forward-looking climate models to the extent possible in their modeling. A lot of what happens, people don't really realize this, but today, when insurance companies underwrite natural catastrophe risk, they do it, with a model that is based on a portfolio. They're not actually looking at forward-looking risk. So I think it requires innovation. I think it requires forward thinking, and I think it requires, really in integrating climate risk rigorously under underwriting guidelines and premium pricing. If that doesn't happen, then insurance isn't serving its vital function, which is pricing risk.
So Nandini, do you see any traction here, or are they working on this properly?
No, absolutely. No, without a question.
Great.
That is absolutely underway. We at Carbon Pool, we're happy to be actually the only startup company that's part of the United Nations Environmental Program's Forum for Insurance Transition. And that is full of some of the world's largest insurers working and regulators also working together to figure out, hey, how insurance companies adapt themselves with respect to their own operations, but how do they also price climate risk in a way that is systematic and transparent?
Thank you very much indeed, Nandini. So turning now to Delphine, Bankers Without Boundaries, not borders, but without boundaries. You work in what you might call the green financing, and you've tried as a solution might avoid the catastrophes that we were talking about here. So what about the investors? Are they ignoring the risks? What do you say?
So our objective as at Bankers Without Boundaries, the investment bank for us, is really to mobilize capital. So we interact with a lot of investors. We're investing ourselves, and to change and ensure capital goes to climate-driven solutions. So we do see a lot of awareness actually coming from investors. So that's the really positive things, a lot of collaboration. However, there are still a lot of investors who are overlooking the issues. And in all fairness, it's also because the issues are very complex. Assessing transition risk, we've just talked about a little bit about that. The impact of physical risks on your portfolio. Assessing the potential future regulatory changes is very difficult. And climate requires long-term solutions. Whereas when you're investing, you need to get a sense of your return and if possible, as soon as possible. So we're working with a range of investors. You can't just say the investors. There are lots of different sort of strategies. You've got short-term people who can invest, I don't know, in VC-tech. You have long-term investors who maybe can think a little more in terms of efficient capital. So we see a lot of things. We can see there is still a lot to do, and many investors still overlooking the risk. And this is why actually we think our work is fascinating, because there is a lot to do to build capacity here.
So thank you very much, Delphine. Another question to you is, of course, we need to know all these catastrophes. Are they really speeding up? Are the investors really grasping? I mean, sometimes we say that you need more disasters for things to really kickstart in people's minds to work out how fast they really need to move. So the later events here, LA fires and also the massive floods in Europe and other continents, is there a heightened risk awareness among the financing sector players?
There is definitely a heightened risk, but a lot of things are being done as well. Via stress testing, disclosure, and also ESG integration. The problem is you don't have enough money going towards prevention and building resilience. I think there is only 1% of the funds going towards climate adaptation now. So this is why we think it's quite crucial to really advocate the development of solutions. We've created an adaptation center of excellence, if you want, to make sure that we act as a catalyst for moving capital towards these type of needs.
Well, thank you very much, Delphine. This is important work you're doing, indeed. So turning now to you, Falk, CEO of Exponential Roadmap Initiative. You put together businesses and innovators that want to have their emissions, commit to having their emissions before 2030. So you want, from where you sit, what changes need to happen in the finance sector in the world to really avoid financial chaos that might have if we do not act accordingly? What needs to happen?
Yeah, the companies we bring together, as I said, are the absolute frontline companies. And they actually deliver on having by 2030. A high number of them is actually transforming value chain according to the carbon law. What was since 2018, I think, that we would need to have emissions every decade from 2020 to have an opportunity to stay within the 1.5. So they are on course. They stay on course. So I think that is just a really important message. They will not change. Now,
It doesn't matter who's in the White House. That's what you're saying, basically.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yes. They will stay on course.
Mm.
They will implement, yes. Now, and we shouldn't be too distracted by that.
No.
That's just a key message. Okay. Now we are about 5 years behind. It has started the halving by 2020, basically. And one reason for that is that we haven't scaled up the solutions sufficiently fast in order to shift out the fossil economy. They need to follow this exponential pathway, and we know that solutions scale slowly in the beginning, and then they reach the point. Suddenly start to scale very, very fast. So that is one of the challenges. We are not scaling sufficiently fast, but we might come to a point where we are bending the curve, which I think is a tremendous opportunity pretty soon. And then we, of course, have a big depth of 5 or 6 years that we have to address, which increase the risks tremendously. Now, in terms of the finance system, well, we need, of course, to shift us to transforming value chains. All our companies are working on basically in the direction of moving towards net zero value chains, where we basically phase out all fossil fuel, reduce by 90%, and also shift finance towards scaling up climate solutions exponentially and avoid new investments in fossil investments. So completely stop that. So that is what needs to happen.
Thank you very much, Johan Falk. Ingmar Rentzhog, turning now to you. I mean, before you started, we don't have time. You worked in the financial sectors with communications, and having listened to these experts here talking about the risks connected to the financial sector, connected to the climate risks, what are your thoughts from a communicating perspective?
I think it becomes more and more clear, and especially when you hear someone with deep knowledge in the insurance industry, the climate crisis will become a financial crisis. That has been discussed long time in climate. We all talked about that, stranded assets. So everyone, I mean, a financial crisis never starts as you expect. It's always a black or green swan. So what everyone has been talking about is that the government will regulate the fossil fuel asset. And if they do that, all the oil companies with findings will be underfinanced, will be bankrupt status, because if they are not allowed to extract the fossil, they have bank loans and stuff, and that will cause a big financial crisis. That doesn't seem to happen, because we have more leaders saying that drill, baby drill, and those things. But what is going to happen very soon, I believe, is the financial crisis. Next financial crisis will be starting insurance driven by or non-insurance, that we can't insure properties because they're going to bond, etc. And this is hidden exactly as a subprime crisis. It was hidden until it's not hidden anymore. And when your real estate is not possible to insure anymore, or super expensive to insure, it will reflect the value, it will go down, and you also have a loan investment in a real estate, and that can trigger a global financial crisis. And this is a double-edged sword, because our government, our political system is not driven by science. It's not reacting on science. They ignore what we're talking about. But our world leaders, if they don't handle the economy, they will be out. Just look at Liz in UK. She didn't handle it that well. She was out. Donald Trump is up for a ride, because those fires in Los Angeles, maybe that's not the starting point, but it will become soon something else that will be the starting point. I think actually this is the starting point. We just don't know the time frame of how it's going to play out.
Thank you, Ingmar. Nandini, do you agree here that the insurance business will be the sort of the setting off the crisis?
Well, I don't know if it'll set off the crisis, but it'll be a strong predictor of the crisis that is about to come. But yeah, to me, it's what Ingmar just said is an entirely plausible scenario. You know, I started my career as a commercial real estate lawyer buying and selling large buildings, and every single one of those big buildings has a gigantic loan on it, right?
Indeed.
And that is indeed a way that you will see that crisis spreading. But I think one thing is really important, which is that policymakers cannot artificially subsidize any longer the cost of insurance. I mean, that has been, what has happened, the reason we still have insurance in places that are commercially uninsurable is because the state has propped up, it has propped up insurance, has offered insurance through last resort schemes. And that makes it seem as though something is insurable when it really shouldn't be. That is a policy choice. That's a political decision. And that's a decision that really shouldn't be made anymore. And one day, soon, I think somebody's going to say, oh, we can't do that anymore, or else we, the state of California, might be bankrupt. Like, we can't do that.
And a lot of the coastlines, wealthy community in Florida, for instance, that's
Absolutely
not a good place to insure your property, huh? So, Professor Tim, what you wanted to add here? You were signaling.
I absolutely agree with this assessment. But what's also really interesting is that the financial sector are not seeing how fast the exponential change is going towards clean technologies that Johan emphasized. So they've got too much money, for example, invested in oil, in car companies that are still the ones that are still more committed to petrol and diesel vehicles, or in the infrastructure associated with that. There's actually a huge financial opportunity in the transformation, because all of our models suggest that we're going to get growth in the real economy that's faster and produces better jobs in transitioning the energy system. But what will also happen is great tumultuous change, because as, for example, we have the exponential uptake of electric vehicles, there'll also be an exponential decline of gas stations, as they're called in the US. It'll become a real nuisance to own a petrol or diesel car, because you won't be able to get it serviced or fueled. So there's a lot of, at the moment, shall we say, expectation that people are invested in oil that they think is going to be sold at some point in the future. But actually the tipping here to electrifying transport, we think, is going so fast that it's going to strand a large amount of fossil fuel asset, large being in the many trillions, and it depends how fast we go. That asset is currently basically held in it by a number of actors, but significant chunk of it will be held by pension funds, according to the analysis I and my colleagues have done. Now, the funds can shift their asset holding if they're smart, but right now they're exposed to a very big risk, and all the other actors that are kind of holding that expectation of future profit from oil. And the major market for oil, which is road transport, is in my view, evaporate a lot faster than the market thinks it will.
You might call this sleepwalking in terms of financial risk. Do you have any other examples of financial sleepwalking in this time of age that you would like to add? Anybody?
So I guess obviously, if you are an asset owner and you've got fossil fuel companies and not doing anything about it, is one example. But I'd like to come back on this idea that, change needs to happen. The question, I think everyone understands whether risk come from and what needs to be done, but it's very difficult. Talking about insurance, they've got sticky portfolios, they are heavily invested in government bonds, particularly, fossil fuel companies necessary. So for them to have an impact on their portfolio, they need to gradually change their asset allocation. And we're marginally going to invest and then progressively green their existing portfolio. And it's complicated. It's not something you can do overnight. It creates a lot of costs. And the one thing that is important is to think on the other side, what can they do? So they can invest in resilience. They can give the right instructions to asset managers. They can try to find financial innovation and solutions where they become an actor of of helping out. So, for instance, if we talk about the insurance, they could issue catastrophic bonds. They could get involved in the finance solution, de-risking some of the financing, or themselves trying to be more present there.
Thank you very much. Anybody else will have share examples of walking in this field? Ingmar.
I think what you and also you were mentioning, there's a lot of examples where financial assets or businesses has quickly gone out of business because things are evolving fast. This is this famous quote from a telecom company, Nokia: "We did nothing wrong." But do anyone here have a Nokia phone? Obviously, it did something wrong. They thought that the market will just keep going exactly as how they were performing good. But things changing, and if you don't see things in the green transition, you're blind. But many people are still blind. Many people are trying to, keep hold of the yesterday, but the yesterday is not the future.
So do we have any other examples of solutions that are outdated? I mean, and also solutions that need more support in order to really fly, so to speak. For instance, we have the SAFs, and also, of course, the direct air capture that needs to be funded, because we need both these techniques. Tim, and then Johan.
I can speak a little bit to that because we've been modeling with the best data we can get hold of the transition or the opportunity for transformation in key sectors. There's certainly opportunity to go a lot faster, probably in all the major sectors, even in transforming to renewable energy. There's still scope to, although it's already exponential, there's still scope to go faster. What we find when we model it out is if governments and leaders, some of them at least, have the courage to put in place the kind of policies that say, we're going to phase in the technology. You're, for example, not going to be able to sell petrol diesel cars in our market after 2035. Yeah, mandates we would call them, phase in mandates, which are also phase out mandates for fossil fuels. Those are the most powerful policies to stimulate innovation and bring forward what are the important reinforcing feedback Johan touched on, that the more solar panels or electric batteries we make, cheaper they get and the better they get. That will also be true for things called electrolyzers, which are used to use electricity to split water to make green hydrogen. That's also true for heat pumps and their installation to electrify building heating and cooling. And we see real opportunity to accelerate change in those major sectors: power supply, road transport, goods transport, home heating and cooling. And also tipping one actually brings forward the tipping point in another if we get decisive policy action, which we're not going to get from everyone, but it doesn't have to be everyone that acts to tip the global economy. That again is a truism that you need. Once a certain fraction of the market is tipping to the new technology, even those who don't want to follow will ultimately be forced to follow.
It's like a positive domino effect.
Exactly. I call it a positive tipping cascade, and I'm calling to policymakers with clear recommendations. These are the policies that will be most effective to bring that forward. But for sure, the financial sector needs to be paying attention as that positive tipping cascade starts to happen, because you want to be shifting your investments quickly to be with the decisions, not with the old regime.
This could be really fast things. I mean, it could really fast transition.
Yeah. We've seen Norway as just a small market, but tip its market from petrol and diesel cars to electric cars within a decade. We've seen the UK shut down coal burning, which was 40% of its power supply in less than a decade. We've seen countries like Namibia in 4 years go from 0% solar electricity to 25%. Uruguay, 0 to nearly 40% wind power in 5 years. This stuff happens fast.
Inspiring. Johan, and then Nandini, please. Johan.
Yeah, just to comment on the sleepwalking, it's absolutely natural when you do a massive transformation that there is a lot of resistance in the system. There was a very strong horse lobby trying to stop all the cars. And when I work with, mobile telephony, the fixed phone people said, "We don't need any mobile phones. We will not invest." anything in the companies I were working in.
Assistance.
Absolute. So it's absolutely natural. Just to be aware of that, we absolutely underestimate the opportunity. The second thing is that we have, as Tim said, a number of technologies which have passed the tipping point. They are accelerating, will shift out fossil. It's electrification, it is renewable energy, it's electrical vehicles. But then we have a number of technology, for example, shifting from a linear to a circular economy in terms of going to circular fossil-free materials, which is held back because of fossil subsidies. We have problems in the system which actually is laying that transformation. That is a big problem. The key opportunity, as I see from business perspective, is that all companies now are implementing so-called transition plans, which means basically integrating climate and nature as part of their business plans. And they need to show that when we're transforming the economy, that they have an opportunity not only to see business, but actually to grow their business. So that is a massive opportunity. But now these need to be linked to national plans, because if you just have really strong company value chain transition plans, and if it's not linked to national and city plans, we will not be able to drive that virtuous loop. So I see a tremendous opportunity in linking now these transition plans on a company level with nations, and that is happening because we need to lead from the front line to be able to pass that tipping point, I think.
And then there's, of course, a moment of truth coming up in Rio when the NDCs are disclosed, and we can see how well the companies, how well they are aligned and how much work they have been able to do together, right? So Nandini, your comment here, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I can't agree more that regulation has a really critical role to play. I mean, in two particular ways. I think when it comes to systemic financial risk, transparency and disclosure is critically important, right? You can't price something that you don't know about. So I think that's where things like the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive or the new standards promulgated by IFRS concerning sustainability reporting are really critical. And I think you're going to see a lot of action in the next years once those reports become public. And once that data is available, and once there is a widespread understanding of where companies really are with respect to their transition, I think you will see a really big push for action. And the other point I wanted to make about regulation is, there are tools right now today that are in use. The compliance markets, right? The compliance markets would require people to reduce their emissions over time. One very easy thing to do. Now, I say it's easy because I'm not a politician dealing with lobbyists, but one easy thing to do, right, is to expand the reach of those compliance markets. And that you see happening, for example, in the airline industry. The airline industry today has a brand new compliance market applying to airlines. The trouble with that, though, is that the carbon credits that are necessary for the airlines to meet the targets in the compliance system aren't available. Why aren't they available? Because there isn't enough capital going into carbon projects. And you did also mention direct air capture. And I just want to say, I mean, I am all throwing it for investing every possible solution, but I think it's really important to acknowledge publicly and loudly that there is no other solution. There's no better solution at scale today for removing carbon from the atmosphere than trees, than nature, and protecting nature and enhancing nature. Growing, reforesting, and stopping. Exactly. It's proven. It's been proven for centuries and it works. So what I would love to see much more support for policymakers in making industries part of compliance schemes, allowing carbon offsets from the voluntary market into those compliance schemes so that there is a demand signal, so that lenders finance those projects, so that insurers develop the capacity to insure those projects. I mean, it is a crisis. Sorry, I'm walking my statement back.
Thank you, Nandini. Ingmar.
I think we're talking about a few things here, but to get back to this with the positive aspect, the solutions. What amazed me still is the knowledge of how fast solutions are scaling is slow. I was just talking in there actually before this panel in an energy panel with a lot of energy people in the room. And I asked them the same question I ask in many audiences. No answer almost. And that is a very simple question. How big of the energy mix last year of the global electric energy production was fossil free? It was 40%. And people are expecting much lower numbers. And 40%, that's almost 50%. And once you have a new technology going past 50%, it's going to speed up, and it's not, the old technology is going to be phased out. And so that's very positive. And I also just add a positive thing. We had the same event. There were actually the previous head of energy department in the US. She was fired days ago.
2 days ago.
So she said that I can say anything I want. And I'm a little bit skeptic with those US people. Sorry for offending if it's some US people here, because they're always, Trump will not want, they are going to be able to change the green transition, will not be able to kill the US inflation because we want to keep doing it. I am skeptic about that because it's a lot of wishful thinking. You say something and hope becomes true because that is you think you can influence things. I don't believe that. But when a head of the energy department in the US is saying, I can say exactly what I want, I have a lot of donors, I know the new people appointed, the US is going to stay on track in green transition internally. It will not be big chances. People, I mean, even if you have drill, baby drill, who will do it?
Yeah.
There's not just a demand for it. So that's very positive, I would say, and that will all change the finance of the whole thing.
Thank you. So a final question here in terms of policies and legislation and business world, the business world. Do you see a divide here? I mean, sort of between the political leaders, and I mean, for sure we do in some countries, but how do we bridge this divide? Is science enough, or do we need more communicators like Ingmar? Do we need what do we need to? If first, is there describe the divide, and do we need to bridge it, and
I'm
how?
happy to take this one.
Please.
There is a divide, definitely, because governments tend to be policy-led in their actions, whereas typically investors are going to look at market failures. And therefore, it's a completely different perspective. And this is why we need to reconcile, and I think you touch upon that, making sure we align the NDC's objectives to the individual transition plans of investors. When we are working actually on projects, particularly in emerging markets, but we do the same actually in developed countries, we try to match the public entities who are really involved in the solutions and combine that with the investors' objectives. And that's very, very important. For instance, if you work in Africa and you can work on strictly private projects, but if you do work with governments on government-aligned projects, you go twice quicker. And maybe twice is not even the number. So this is very, very important to have, to break, if you want, the divide between public money, private money, and make people work together. Now, how do you do that? Yes, maybe a little bit of policy, but it's about practicalities. So you've got lots of other actors who can come in and help with that. Philanthropy is one, catalytic capital, investors thinking about de-risking structures, asking public entities to come, risk investments so that private investors are much more comfortable with the overall structure. So yes, there is a divide, but there are also some people working on, breaching this kind of misunderstanding, if you want, and building capacity around it.
Excellent. Last intervention here from Tim, then I need to round up this panel.
I think there's potential for great alignment between policy and business, but what business needs is a very clear and unwavering signal for policy when it makes a regulation that we're going to go with the change. Business needs to know that policy is not going to change its mind sometime later, because essentially this great transformation we're talking about has quite a lot of upfront capital cost. You've got to retool from your combustion engines to your electric vehicles, manufacturing plant or whatever. But once you're committed, you're in a great place. You're making a lot of money in the exponential growth of the new technology, but uncertainty from the regulator, from government, that's your real big enemy. So what we need is leaders and government systems with the courage and the kind of fixity to stick with setting a clear framework. This is the direction you're going to follow, and then businesses and finances is all for it. I mean, they've still got to raise the capital, but they know there's great gains in the change.
Great gains in the change. That's a wonderful final word here for this panel. Thank you very much, all of you, for sharing your insights and for the work you do to make this happen. And let's make sure that we keep the pressure on. And thanks again. And for all of you watching this, if you were inspired, please join us on our platform and write to us, write to each other, watch other films that we have created, other broadcasts. There's lots to be done, and we need all hands on deck. So thank you very much, and let's move. We all know about the Sustainable Development Goals, right? It's a fantastic plan to take us to a safe place in the future in many aspects here. And we have only about 5 years to go before we are supposed to be reaching all these 17 goals and the 169 targets that are connected with the Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, there's much more work that needs to be done. We're not really there in many of the areas and many of the targets and definitely many of the goals. And much of this work needs to be done in the continent of Africa. So while many areas of Africa have seen inspiring levels of progress in recent years, the situation remains stark. Of course, the continent is home to 16% of the world's population, but the economy of this continent only stands for about 3%. So this is a critical junction for Africa here that we're facing, and many, of course, challenges connected to this. So we need to embrace the work for the SDGs to empower the transition of this continent. Of course, it needs investments, and the prioritization of these investments can unlock the benefits for the humans, the people, and all the businesses, of course, and nature in this part of the world. So we're going to talk about this now, and I have wonderful guests here. And I'd like to present Sandrine Henton, Managing Director, EG Capital. Wonderful to have you here. And I have Matteo Calabrino, Vice President, Bankers Without Boundaries. Terrific. And Jacqueline Omotale, that's you, Jacqueline.
That's
I
me.
think I was looking at the wrong person here. Sorry. The cold is getting to me a bit here. Terribly sorry for that. Jacqueline Omotalade, you're head of partnership, engagements, and investment at Paxera Global. So, thank you all for joining us here. Are you comfortable?
We're comfortable.
You're comfortable for a
Very
while.
much.
That's terrific. You're a sheepskin, so it's helping you a bit. So, Jacqueline, let's start with you. Paxera Global is a nonprofit organization. It's not really a financial institution. So could you please set the stage for us to really grasp this better than I could do in my intro here?
Yes.
What challenges are we facing?
I am happy to set the stage, and I think what Paxera Global does, because it is a nonprofit, it's not an investment, although I come from an investment background, I think it is a critical bridge between the private sector and the nonprofit sector. As we know, what we need to achieve the SDG goals is $1 trillion movement, right? It is not going to be solved just by the philanthropic sector. And we truly have to understand that and understand to be able to speak the language that investment speaks to really drive the development that we want to see happen in terms of the green energy transition. And Pyxera Global has positioned itself be that wedge in between the nonprofit world, but also the investment sector. And that is very much what a lot of my role at Pyxera Global is about.
So what insights can you share from your perspective, from your organization, you in terms of course, the financing, need of the financing in this sector? Could you elaborate a bit on this?
So a couple of things. One, I would say that I approach Africa and I approach investment in Africa, and previously I approached my portfolio of investments in Africa from a very optimistic perspective. There are so many opportunities there for investment. And in fact, I think when you think about like growth and the opportunity for growth, I don't see another market where the potential is that, right? It's not going to happen pretty much anywhere else in the world. It is also an opportunity to renew and reimagine how investment is done. And I will give you an example. So the work that Pyxera is focused on, and I've also focused on in the past, is around the ownership models. And like, what does that look like? And how do you de-risk that? And as my esteemed colleague and I here, we're talking kind of offline about, right, adding another complexity into what is already a very complex idea of how investments can and should be done. So first and foremost, I think lots of times people start off the conversation around Africa and investment in Africa from a very, like, there are challenges, but there are also so many opportunities and the rewards that can happen in terms of like growth and portfolio opportunities for me far outweigh the perceived and actual risk.
Do you have a favorite example to share?
So for example, we heavily invested and worked in Nigeria during the pandemic, working in northern Nigeria. So thinking about the security and other challenges, right? But we were a partner with both like the private and the public sector around small and medium-sized businesses to develop the infrastructure, as well as the skills and tools necessary to actually quadruple some of their returns even during the pandemic.
That's a great example. Thank you very much, Jacqueline. So Bankers Without Boundaries, we had a representative here just in the previous panel. So Matteo, you describe your entity as the Bankers for the Earth, an investment bank for the Earth. I think it's such a beautiful framing. So how do you really differentiate yourself from other type of banking? Could you tell us about this, please?
Sure. And first of all, thank you so much to the We Don't Have Time team for the fantastic invitation. So I guess that the key differentiation from the rest of the investment banks is that we mobilize capital entirely and only for climate, green, and social projects, nothing else. And that basically means to develop innovative financial instruments that can really attract the different forms of capital, not just the traditional one, to where it is the most. And this is truly the mission of our firm, which started almost 10 years ago. And now, fast track to today, it is in more than 40 different countries around the world.
Wow.
Yes. Mainly focusing in emerging markets in Asia and Africa, but also a lot in Europe as well. And the key point on that is to understand that the investment banking skills that are so much needed for other different organizations in terms of raising capital, structuring investment, et cetera, are not accessible to everybody. And I'm talking about NGOs, I'm talking about people that require capital to do fantastic things under a social and green perspective, but do not necessarily have the skills and the capacity to do that. So our business model is based on the fact of trying to provide those kind of skills to those people. And so far, it's a fantastic journey.
Thank you very much, Matteo. Could you elaborate a bit on the quality of life and the human aspect of what you do, especially the focus here in Africa?
Sure thing. So just to give you a practical example, we have recently launched something called the Africa Capital Hub, or ACH. And the hub has the purpose to mobilize 1 billion of USD by 2030 in green and social projects. And the beauty of that is that the purpose is really to mobilize capital for government-owned and government-aligned projects. And this is going to be at no cost for all the players involved, which, because it's a philanthropic organization, we are supported by philanthropists in doing that. And these allow us to create a completely different business model that can really support all the players that are in need, from government to social enterprises and so on and so forth, and raising capital for things like reducing children mortality rates, or improving school meals and school feeding in schools where it is the most needed, and keeping people in school. So things with a concrete and real impact.
Well, it's truly inspiring. So turning now to you, Sandrine, you're in a private equity fund in Nairobi, Kenya.
Yeah, I'm actually replacing Sandrine, right? Obviously, I'm not Sandrine. I'm
Because I was so that's honest. It's like that's a female name, but it's
No
a
worries.
French name. So sometimes the French names can be male and female. I was thrown
that's
off.
true.
Please introduce you.
So yeah, my name is actually Guillaume. It's also a French name, as you can hear, and I represent an organization that's called SIFI, which stands for SDG Impact Finance Initiative, which has a lot of similarities with what you do, Matteo, as well. Our goal is also to mobilize private capital for the SDGs in emerging markets. We want to mobilize up to $1 billion US for funds in impact investing. And we do that by essentially providing first loss equity capital to those funds. So that means because we want those impact investing funds to strive, we want to help them de-risk themselves by investing in junior equity tranches. So that's where you take the first risks if there are any losses. And by doing so, we actually attract private investors into those solutions, and we help them scaling up. So that's how essentially we operate. We also help new solutions to exist, innovative solutions to exist, by providing them with grants to do feasibility studies, for instance, or to start the business. And we do ecosystem building by talking to governments, to regulators, but also to stock exchanges, to rating agencies. And together we are trying to build an ecosystem that actually makes sense for impact investing and that facilitates the investment from private investors and institutional players.
So Guillaume, where are you based? I think you didn't say
I'm
that.
based in Switzerland, so not very far from Davos, but on the other side in Geneva.
So the company is, or the entity is based
The entity is based in Switzerland, yes, but it's an international platform. We are launched, I would say, by Switzerland, by the government of Switzerland, and also the main financial institution. So UBS Optimus Foundation is part of the board as well. And we were joined more recently the government of Luxembourg, and a few more partners are going to join soon. So we will have a nice announcement to make soon.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for replacing Sandrine, and sorry about the confusion here.
No worries.
So I'm going to open up the forum here to any of you to answer these questions that I prepared. So let's start with an overarching question about what is the key change in how we're operating that will be able to unlock these crucial investments that will enhance the SDG work in Africa.
So I
You're
think what
correct, Jeff. Go ahead.
the esteemed colleagues and I are all saying is around like systemic change.
Ah.
Like we are actually creating new ecosystems. Like for instance, even with Pixera Global, we have a systemic climate action collaborative, which is made up of 15 nonprofits. And it's almost, I see it as complementary to what my esteemed gentlemen on my side are doing as well, in terms of we are unlocking like $1 billion as well, to really kind of rethink and reimagine and de-risk both Africa, but also the broader global South as well as the global North. So I think that the insight perspective of those who are willing to reimagine and rethink how things are done and have been done. I think particularly when you think about like investments in green investments, right? And I'm glad my esteemed colleague here pointed out that those are different than like traditional investments, right? And it is even among my friends who are in traditional finance, all of them don't possess that skill set. And are really trying to learn because it is impacting everybody's portfolio at this point, some part of climate.
So we're talking about systemic change here. And of course, there's so many players that need to be able to play this, well, to change this thinking together in parallel or most hopefully together. So we have the governments, we have the NGOs, we have the different businesses, we have the different levels of businesses. So how do we best facilitate that they could do this trajectory quickly enough together? What buttons do we push? Guillaume.
Well, you're right, value chain, right? That needs to be changed. It's a system actually that needs to be changed or adapted. I think, it's super powerful in creating wealth. We've built a system that was able to bring us where we are today. 8 billion individuals on average, much more educated, wealthy, etc., than a few centuries ago. But we've seen the limitation of that system now. Climate change is one of them. It's not the only one. We have all 17 SDGs that need to be addressed. And the question becomes, how do we adapt this economic system to make it sustainable for the long term and next generations? And how do we make sure that the system actually brings positive externalities and reduces negative ones? And to do that, I think the key is investment, right? We can't do without investment. It has to start with investment. And so once you've said that, the only question which is valid is how do you bring more private investments into projects? So all along the value chain, funds, companies that produce positive externalities. And how do you motivate and incentivize capital to flow towards those projects? And I think, what we're talking about today is really that, right? Mobilizing private investments. And to do that, you need to, first of all, de-risk that investment, make sure that the investment is less risky, and also change the perception from investors. Because sometimes, it's not as risky as it looks. It is not risky, actually, to invest in microfinance, for instance, in Africa. It's not risky at all. But you still need to make sure that people understand that more clearly. So the work with rating agencies is super important. And then there is the questions of liquidity regulations. So it's bringing all of those people together and create investment ecosystem that is conducive for that type of investment and that values positive.
For instance, one of the typologies of models that have been really going on in the latest period, especially under a social perspective, is the outcome-based financing systems. So I think that you mentioned before UBS, Optimus Foundation, they were really the pioneers that put this into the market. And now we are taking inspiration from them in terms of developing financing and financial mechanisms that, based on results achieved on the ground, can sort of change the interest rate and the returns to the investors. So that's definitely one. In addition to that, we have heard about blended finance so much. In my view, the current version of the blended finance is working to the point that it's needed. So innovation is going to be fundamental on that side. And for instance, what we want to do at BWB is really to play with all these different blended finance structures that we can apply to funds in relation to green and social investments. And there are plenty of sectors where this could work, from water to and blue economy to agriculture. And we talked about before the role of philanthropies. So it's a combination of different form of capitals, philanthropic, public, private, that comes together to sort of de-risk the investment and attract more and more capital. So I think that in terms of innovation side, quite a few things are happening in Africa. Now, over the time, will tell us if all the innovative instruments will work as expected.
Thank you, Mathieu.
And I would just like to add one thing, because I think my esteemed colleague made a very good point. And as a very proud African, I think the storytelling as well, right? Because there are real risk and then there are made up risk, right? And I think it is so important that as these innovations happen, that those stories are being told
Indeed.
that the moment is now for Africa. And Africa is the future.
Thank you for pointing this out, because there's always a risk of there's this sort of you build on that stories and you think this is actually the truth, and the risk is if instead of as it should be.
Yes, and I think it's about like investor risk appetite, but also investor knowledge, right?
Knowledge.
And as more and more innovations happen, I think it's very important to have platforms like that, where we start sharing that knowledge and sharing that Africa is open for business. And folks, if they truly want to be bullish, if they truly are thinking of future and forward thinking, then Africa is where the money should come.
Thank you for saying that out so clearly. I'd like to talk a little bit about what I did touch base on before. How can the African nations become better prepared to sort of open up and also align policies to make it possible for investors to actually step in countries? What is needed in terms of this transition here from the policy side? What are you lacking, Guillaume? You're focusing on investment.
I think one key element is, from the investment perspective, is the access to liquidity. So we need functioning capital markets in Africa, as well as in the entire world, actually. But of course, those capital markets, they tend to working in developed countries and less so in developing countries. So, it's amorphing the pump, if I can say. It's bringing more investment, bringing more liquidity to this bringing more a more active secondary market. So, for instance, right, one idea would be for development banks, MDBs, DFIs to be able also to buy shares of funds on the secondary markets, much more than investing in primary markets. It's also making sure that this community of development, they bring liquidity to private investors. So building the foundations and the pipes for private investors to actually step in rather than almost competing with them by taking shares of those funds directly. I think that's what's needed. And then it's also, we need the infrastructure as well, right? At another level, we need more education infrastructure, very simply more roads as well, transportation to be more fluid, and goods to be transferred from one country to another more easily. So those are simple ideas, but they need to be in place and very concretely.
Thank you. How about the intersection here between, we need to strengthen the economy in Africa, but also we need to be able to address the other parts of SDGs, that's the nature to preserve. We have a escalating climate crisis, and we have a loss of biodiversity that's devastating. So from your perspective, coming from this beautiful continent, how do you ensure the protection of nature so we don't just go all in and invest and don't really take into account that we need to protect that side of the coin?
It's interesting because I was in an interesting discussion with the president of Botswana yesterday. Of that very beautiful and gorgeous country, just talking about traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge, right? And generations of it in terms of understanding the connection between people and planet and nature. And I think it is there, right? And as we think about, particularly as Africans, as we think about the future of our individual nations, I'm proudly Nigerian. How do we make sure that knowledge is not lost, nor our identity lost? Because most African cultures are very closely aligned with nature. And even as we open up for business for the world, and we've always been open, we need to make sure that we just don't lose that. And I think that requires an intentionality and of bringing people into the conversation, because our cultures indigenously are connected to planet.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's take a final question here before I ask you to give a call to action, because I always sometimes like to do that. So looking at what key actions of shifts are needed from African leaders. We touched upon this a bit before, and also from the global community to fully unlock the transformative possibilities of working with the SDGs to enhance the speeding up the delivery of the SDG in Africa. Do you have any thoughts on this, Matteo?
So I would say that, if we look at the investors environment right now, and I'm not going to sugarcoat this, Africa is not doing well, right? In the last 10 years, all the flow capital that was supposed to come to Africa to sort of generate a similar economic and social boom to what happened, for instance, in East Asia, didn't really happen, didn't really concretize. And that's because of many issues that we talk about during this panel. But there are a series of numbers that are really sort of useful to understand the situation. For instance, the Africa Development Bank said that in order to empower Africa under an economic and social perspective and really leave that sort of change that is needed SDG perspective, the amount of capital needed is 400 billion per year.
Per year.
Yes, and this is
Staggering
actually the current annual funding gap that the Africa is experiencing, which is around 40% of its GDP. And the economic sort of ecosystem right now between Africa and the world is currently in terms of growing. DFIs are not investing as much as they should into the continent. Only around, I think, 3 or 4% of the total amount of capital DFIs and NDVs are in Africa. So these are the current situation. But what can really be done, and what is I'm honestly very not only passionate but also optimistic about, is that you have these key actors that are slowly but steadily implementing new solutions on the ground. If you look at the trend, for instance, of the philanthropic money going to Africa, is increasing year by year, and we know how important philanthropic capital is. It comes to the risking investments and similar activities. And in addition to that, you have the governments in Africa that are slowly, steadily improving what we like to call the public capital deployment efficiency. So they're using their money slightly better, and they are getting closer and closer in terms of involving private actors, where usually they were not supposed to, or were usually not investing. So they're using their capital to achieve 10x, 5x type of impact through innovative financial instruments. So in the short term, the situation is not so great, let's put it this way, but the perspective on the medium long term are much better.
Thank you, Matteo. So, time for the call to action here. We have a lot of global leaders gathered here in Davos, and we have millions of people watching our broadcasts. So some of them might actually be listening to your call to action, some of the global leaders. So what call to action would you like to send them in terms of how to enhance the financing of sustainable growth in Africa? Jacqueline, please. Jump in.
I want to end.
You want to end? That's clever. You were quick anyway.
So I would say, and I would invest in Africa, invest in emerging markets, invest in impact investing, and you will see that it actually works and brings a lot of impact, of course, but also very positive returns. I think, the financial system is all built on trust. And so as long as we don't trust those countries and continents, it will not work, right? So we have to give trust to development. And when you look at specifically Africa, it's a continent that is growing very fast in terms of demography. Everyone is needed. And you don't need to be an economist to know that growth is the result of, the growth of demography and also the productivity gains that can be done. So even from a pure rational perspective, that's where productivity will happen because a lot has to catch up, right, with other countries. And that's also where demography is rising very, very rapidly.
Excellent.
We have no choice. It's a continent where 1 out of 4 people will live tomorrow. We need to build infrastructures. We need investment for that. And that's going to be rewarding. So invest.
So invest. Thank you, Guillaume. Matteo, a little bit shorter if you can, because I'm looking at the clock.
I'll do my best. My advice is do not try to reinvent the wheel. There are lots of solutions that are actually currently working under a financial investment perspective. But at the same time, try to be bold in terms of innovation and exploring projects and activities that are not usually considered so much bankable or traditional investments.
Thank you very much, Matteo. Jacqueline, you get the last word.
Yeah, and I would say to what my colleagues have said, it is be bold. There's a lot of opportunity there. There's a lot of potential for innovation. And there is a population that is hungry for it. And so go in and just make some magic happen, but stay connected to community and understand local needs and concerns.
Well, thank you very much, Jacqueline. Thank you very much, Guillaume. And thank you very much, Matteo, for joining us here in front of the Arctic Basecamp here for the We Don't Have Time broadcast. And you have inspired us. You have inspired the viewers. And I'm turning now to the audience here. What is if you want to interact with these fabulous speakers, you can go online on our platform. We have all sorts of opportunities for you to share your stories to help push this development. Because what you're talking about here is real, and it's very promising, and there's ways to build Africa stronger and stay green. I mean, we don't need to fight against economy and nature with the growing economy. We can fix this. So thank you very much for joining us. Now let's move on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Following up on this great conversation we just had here on the future of Africa and working with the SDGs and making the economy greener and stronger in Africa, we have somebody here with us as a guest who's intimately familiar with the reality on the ground in West Africa. And you're doing some wonderful and incredible work there. Mawuse Christina Gyisun, did I fairly correctly pronounce?
Gyisun.
Gyisun.
Yes.
Thank you. You're the co-founder and CEO of SummerLife.
COO.
COO of SummerLife. And it's an Agritech company that is creating transparency and traceability in the shea business. And not everybody might know what shea is. So let's just kickstart that when we'll continue. What is shea?
Thank you so much. It's good to be here. So shea is it's a nut that is used for food largely in the global market. So when you eat chocolate, shea in it. When you eat biscuit, there's some shea in it, and margarine as well. So 90% of shea, which is the butter, goes into food, and the 10% goes into cosmetics and pharmaceutical companies.
Wonderful. I use shea every day in margarine. I use it in my hair products. I use it in my body lotion. And of course, since palm oil has been very problematic, I assume the shea business has been
a good substitute for that. Yes,
it's a great substitute. So millions of women farmers are involved in the shea production in West Africa, and of course they provide necessary materials for a multi-billion industry. And yet many of them live in poverty.
Yeah.
Many of them earn less than $2 a day.
Yes.
Which is it's really, really little. So your organization is SummerLife. You work to increase the income of these rural women and producers in West Africa. You do it through innovative financing, market access, and also agroforestry.
Yes.
And this is really, really impressive. And you have been named one of the Schwab Foundation's new social entrepreneurs and innovators of the year. So congratulations for that.
Thank you so much.
That's a big achievement, of course. So tell us a bit about your background and how SummerLife came to life.
Yeah, I like that. So SummerLife, I grew up in the northern part of Ghana, particularly the Upper West region, where we have shea. And as a little girl, I was helping my family by going to the market to sell water after school hours to support my family with the income. So during this time, I will meet the women who walk about 30 kilometers each way to the market to sell their produce, and they end up with little to no profit at the end of the day. So sometimes when I sit with them, they will talk about the challenges they are facing, and they will say, okay, some of you are the ones going to school. Once you come out, come and save us. So that lived with me. And so I decided to take my studies very seriously, and I got the opportunity to also work with some development organizations, including GIZ, where I was in charge of supporting women with market certification and training. So during that time, it opened my eyes to the problems within the various value chains, and my attention was on the value chain. I realized that these women will carry the produce and make no profit. So for them, the best option was to cut down the trees to make some quick income. So they'll cut down the trees for charcoal to make some quick income for their basic needs, which is understandable if you ask me. But then it is leading to deforestation, and the same shade tree is competing with cocoa in the market. So cocoa butter, when cocoa is expensive, share comes, should I say, the celebrity of the day because it saves the food industry. So I was wondering, why then is the women not getting their worth from this quality, or should I say high valued commodity? So I decided to start Suma Life, basically ensuring that we digitize the operations of women because they are fragmented, they are undigitized, and the kind of buyers who also need them to also report on their environments and social impacts, because their government now is requiring them, and also their customers are also asking questions about where are you getting your raw materials, why are you getting this and that. So we thought, okay, this is where we can, that's the sweet spot. We can create value for them by digitizing these women and present them with impact data. Then as a result of that, they will pay premium to these women to improve their livelihood. And that's how we started.
This is truly impressive work you're doing. And just to think that you carry encouragement from women with you all throughout your studies. That's quite something, huh? Mm-hmm. So in our last session here, that was before you sat down with me, we were discussing the United Nations Sustainability Goals, and I know that they figure the SDGs are very strong in your mission of your company.
Yeah.
So tell us about the SDGs and how you address them, and also how you incorporate them in your work, in your organization, please.
Thank you. So our main mission is to eradicate poverty. So we are working to eradicate poverty, especially among smallholder farmers, women. So I'm a bit, when I say women, it sounds like I'm being a bit biased, but because the share value chain is led by women, known as women business, because of the chores, or should I say the processing, it looks household chores, carrying and hitting and
it's not that
grinding. Yes, it looks like something a man will not typically do over there. So it is a woman's value chain, or it's led by women. So we are working to improve their income. That's the SDG that we are interested in, no poverty. We are interested in gender equality. These women are the ones making the magic happen. But when you look at them, living on $2 daily with a household of an average of 5 people, that is totally unfair. So for us, we want to get to a level where these women have enough income for themselves, take care of their basic needs, and be able to even save something for the raining days or when there's emergency. And they will be to make decisions for themselves and be at nobody's mercy. And that's the kind of work that's what we are working towards. So we are interested in gender equality, and also environment, climate action. So, like I mentioned, shade trees, they sequester carbon a lot, and compared to other trees like, should I say, bamboo, or even the moringa tree. So you are better off keeping shade trees alive than cutting them for charcoal
and harvesting the shea nuts.
Yes,
keeping the trees.
Exactly. A typical shade tree, the ones that are naturally regenerated, will take 20 years to grow, and once they grow, they will fruit for 100 years.
Wow.
So look at the generations that this can feed, right? So for us, we are working to make sure that the 16 million women who depend on this tree have their livelihood sustained, like you mentioned, to harvest continually for 100 years. And then climate-wise, we are mitigating the crisis by making sure that the women are resilient. So we have agroforestry as well that we do, where the women are encouraged to plant trees within their farmlands, right? So it's also part of the things we do. We also train them to raise new share trees or seedlings and transplant them. And then we've been working towards training them to be able to maybe put this on the carbon market so that becomes an extra source of income for them. So this is why we are. So these are the three main SDGs we are interested in: no poverty, gender equality, and climate action.
How many, when you say we, how many are you in your organization?
We are over 100 now. I mean, those employees, people on payroll, we are over 100. For the women, we have over 100,000 women in our network right now, and 40,000 of them were connected to markets. They've earned more than 21% extra income above the lower market prices.
That's beautiful.
Thank
Really, it's moving to hear your story.
Thanks so much.
Have you been in contact with the women at the market that inspired you to stay focused throughout school and to achieve what you achieved?
Yes, I'm intentionally COO because I want to be very close to the women.
That's what because in my mind you were
Chief
CEO,
Operating Officer means that I am closer to the women. I'm making sure that what the impact look on the ground in my head or in the minds of our team is actually on the ground when you go there. So it's not just by words. So I'm intentionally there so that I can keep that contact. So whenever I'm back in Ghana, I visit the field to get new insights, let them know we are here for them. If there are new problems that we could solve in the value chain, they have to prompt us so that we can be innovative or evolve as well. Yes.
Terrific. So let's talk a little about the Schwab Foundation Awards. They highlight individuals employing innovative market-based approaches to directly address social issues. That's a quote here. So what do you see from your perspective as the significance of addressing these market-based approaches?
For me, using market-based approach to solving social problem means that we are not dependent on philanthropy, generosity, which we are not sure could be there forever. And
tomorrow,
anything could happen. There could be recession, there could be anything, and you don't want people to keep waiting, hoping that a savior will come out from somewhere and save them, right? And that means putting these women at the mercy of other people's generosity, and that's unfair. So using market approach means that Summa Life is working to create value for the foreign market or the export markets to unlock certain premium for the women to be able to improve their own livelihoods. So with or without Summa Life, these women are empowered to continue this business. Whatever could happen, something could happen that Summa Life is no more there, and philanthropies are also no more there, but these women have something to live on every day.
So for people watching this all over the world, how can they make sure that when purchase products with shea in them, first of all, should they buy more products with shea in them? And how could they make sure that these products are fairly sourced and that the people all throughout the value chain, all the way down to women picking them and them to market are fairly compensated?
Yeah, I think that, like I started mentioning that we saw that these food manufacturers have new demands from customers. We know that before buyers were not questioning source of the food they are eating. Now we have that. We have people questioning, where are you getting this from? Who made it? What is the impact on the environment? So the EUDR, a good policy, if you ask me, to make sure that some of these tree crops and the farmers produce them get their fair share. So I would say that the markets or final consumers should keep asking questions, demand for more, and be also willing to pay, because I understand that it brings this financial burden on these companies. So if consumers are asking questions and they are willing to pay for the cost of getting these across, like environmental and social impact across or throughout the value chain, I'm sure that the women that we work with will also get their fair share. And they, as customers, will be making the world a better place for everyone.
Excellent. So certification. There are some products that, for instance, one of the bigger entities here, the Body Shop, they've been using a lot of certifications of their nut products, for instance, including shea, I think.
Yeah.
So how what is your take on do we need certification? How do we make sure that the certification is valid, and what kind of, do you have any certification on the products that come from life?
Yes, so part of we have organic certification, which we are yet to renew. You know, organic certification is something.
Oh, there was a gust of wind. No worries, you didn't do anything.
So organic certification is renewable annually, so we are yet to renew again. And I feel that usually organic certification they have, or the certification they have quite stringent requirements that for a local producer, it becomes a bit, it overburdens the local producer or the woman.
Overburdens them.
Because it's expensive and also time consuming, right? So for me, I feel it's a good thing, but the measures should be a bit flexible and easy to navigate, because you need a consultant to actually take you through all the requirements and what they mean on the ground, right? Because these are very, should I say, sophisticated steps or booklet that you have to go through and understand how you can put that on the ground before the external certifier comes in and take you. So I feel they are okay, they are good, they help with verification and building trust and transparency. However, the requirements have to be a bit flexible and plain for the farmer side. I'm sure for the international market side or the buyer side, they understand them easily because they will certify as importers. But for us, we have to certify as producers. And for producers, that's where the challenge is, like what I mentioned with the requirement and steps.
So next time I buy a hair conditioner with shea, and what is there anything I can look for? Is there any way where I can find Summer Life in the label?
No, because we sell to B2B, so we do B2B.
I figured.
So they will rather put their own label. But I'm sure if you go into details, where do you get it from? They should be able to tell you that maybe I got it from Summer Life. Yes.
Well, that would be terrific to know. You know, Summer in Swedish, the R at the end, means summer.
Oh, I see.
So it's when I first read it, it sounds like a Swedish name. So the summer.
Summer is a Dagari word. So Dagari is a language spoken in the Upper West region, and it means help me. Summa. So help me, and life is English life. So we are helping lives.
That's beautiful. So it's been terrific having this conversation with you. Before we leave here, what can you say about your experience here as a young African leader in your field, coming to Davos? What does it give you? What do you think you primarily bring to Davos? For me, it's very clear. It's power and empowerment, and it's just showing that you could really bring something with you from early on and make it into a legacy. But from your perspective, how would you define your visit here?
I think it's interesting to be here. This is my first time, and usually when I think about the forum, I thought just business people, business as usual people meeting.
End up outside of an Arctic Basecamp.
Interesting. Business as usual people meeting to discuss just pure trade and nothing about social impact. But to my surprise, there are quite some social innovators around that I've met who are doing great stuff. So it's good to know I'm not alone. There are quite a number of people who are usually following the same path like me and are committed to it. And also seeing that there are other people like the foundation working to make sure that there's visibility for social impact of social innovators, and also financing as well. So pushing for funding for that sector as well.
Well, it's been terrific having a conversation with you, and I'm really going to look out for the Summer Life and maybe ask some of my the brands I use if they're using your products. Very inspiring. Best of luck, and thank you again for joining us. And to all of us viewing this, Shea for the world and empowerment of the people really producing these products. It's crucial. So if you want to interact with this story that's been told, you can go to We Don't Have Time to our app and read more about Summer Life. And now let's move on. Thank you. Welcome back. Climate change is a tremendous topic with seemingly, there were so many perspectives to really look into this topic, but behind all of it, there is science. We always need to look to science to move in any direction because it needs to be the right direction. We need to base that on science. So scientific researchers working in a whole slew of fields, so all around the world, you provide critical information that we need to understand this reality of what's happening. So not everybody listens to science, but this is what we need to do. So for our final session here today in this broadcast, we are very pleased to bring out outside this base camp here to offer your perspectives and help us understand the latest climate-related research in the areas of your expertise. So Maria Seeter, you're Arctic Basecamp polar scientist in residence, and you're also doctoral candidate at Tulane University. Wonderful to have you. You're used to this temperature. You're dressed well.
Yes, I am.
This is your base. And also next to you is Dr. James Gyisun, Arctic Basecamp scientist in residence. You're a marine ecologist and data scientist.
Yeah, that's right.
Wonderful to have both of you here. We're actually guests at your place, so be very thankful to be able to be. We are indeed. So, James, to start us off, your perspective on the summary of your background. Then I'm going to turn to you, Maria, as in your area of research. Tell the audience, please, what do you work with?
So I'm a ecologist, and my specialism is with large marine vertebrates, we'd call them. So seabirds, seals, whales. And I use the latest kind of tracking technology to look at their movements around the planet, to understand the places they go, what they're doing when they get there, and the food that they're eating. And then I'm trying to understand how the ecosystems are changing, and then as a result of that change, what might happen to populations.
That would be a wonderful line of work. You can see all sorts of people just going,
It's really interesting.
Yeah, of course.
So I'm quite lucky that we get to go to some amazing places. So
I can imagine.
I've been to the Arctic recently. The last 2 winters I've spent in Antarctica studying snow petrels that breed down there. So it's some brilliant places.
Thank you. And Maria, your field of research, please.
Yeah, I'm Mariah Cedar, and
Mariah, not Maria.
Yeah.
It's tricky sometimes with the spelling.
It is. I'm from Alaska, and I am not a climate scientist by any means, but I had to become aware out of necessity. I'm a public health researcher, and all of the information we're finding across the Arctic, especially in indigenous communities, climate was intersecting everywhere we looked in our data. So I had to become very intimate with the climate crisis, with climate science, and integrate it in public health so we can make sure our populations and communities are healthier.
So Maria, what you're saying here is it's really, you came from very, sort of from a personal level into this. Can you tell us a bit about your background that made you take this step?
Absolutely. So having grown up in Alaska, I've seen the climate change in my own backyard. This Christmas, we had grass. That was just
in Alaska.
Yes, in Alaska. That's never happened in my lifetime there. So having been trained in public health, thinking about communities, thinking about the things that impact our health, and climate is one of those things. And I'm really here to de-silo climate science and public health to make sure that we can be healthier in the future.
If terms of how this affected your career, you stepped in, it's still Mariah. So how did you step into this field and what do you have a little focus area?
Yeah, I come at this at a policy angle. I'm really interested in making sure that we can get scientists.
The angel.
Angle.
You said angel.
Well, I mean,
policy angel, but that's a new framing of the thing.
I mean, we're on the mountaintops. Why not? No, from policy, we know that science needs to be translated as well to change policy and to make sure that our communities have what they need from the science perspective, and making sure that our public health practitioners on the ground can have what they need as well.
So, Mariah, what can you tell us about the intersection between climate and public health here?
Yeah, so what we're finding more and more that it's impacting communities at the individual level. So in public health, we think about things from the individual level, the community, societal, and then kind of globally. So we know that's going all the way down to the individual. So impacting things, mental health. Right now in Alaska, our climate is changing, resources are changing, our seasons are changing. So it's impacting how people work, play, go to school, and it's having huge mental implications. And we need to be having those conversations.
Does it also affect the food patterns, the eating patterns?
Absolutely. How they can access it, when they can access it, if they can at all. Yeah, absolutely.
And how is your work being received?
Well, that's a great question. I think we are speaking to people most of the time that understand the science, but I think we need to really push ourselves in the public health space to really, again, de-silo and reach people who may not be bored quite yet, the people that we can move. That just is showing up, talking to policymakers, and making sure that everyone can have a seat at the table.
Thank you very much, Mariah. So turning to you, James, as a marine ecologist, what is your research so far told you, and what can you tell us about how the climate change is affecting the ecosystems?
Sure. So you said that it's really amazing that we can travel and look at these kind of cute animals, you might say, but really they're the top of many ecosystems. So when ecosystems are in trouble, the animals that are at the top of those ecosystems are the ones that we can see struggling. So, for example, we went up to the Arctic to track the migration of harp seals a few years ago, and they're in an area that's under rapid climate change at the moment, where the breeding grounds are essentially melting out from underneath the mums when they're giving birth to their pups.
Oh dear.
And so in years when we've got poor ice, the pups all drown, and so we get no more seals going into the population that year. And those kind of things are happening more and more in the Arctic. We're also seeing that the areas that they're using are changing. So the northern Barents Sea up in the Arctic Circle, that's changing massively, with cold water species really struggling and a lot of warm water species moving in. And that ecosystem changes so much, the seals then struggle to find food. So we're seeing mothers that don't have enough body condition to have successful pregnancies. So we're really seeing struggles in that population. But on the upside, we can also go places like Antarctica, where we've got snow petrels that travel all around the pack ice and forage. And then when they come back to the brood colonies, they give that food to their chicks. But sometimes they're a bit messy, or sometimes they vomit that food if they're being attacked. And that vomit will accrete around it. And because Antarctica, at least for now, is so cold and so dry, this builds up over time. So we have these amazing records of the changes in the diet of the snow petrel over tens of thousands of years.
So you can desiccate the vomit, basically.
Yep. Yeah. So it becomes almost like a rock. So we can core it, we can measure different elements in it and try and understand what the animals have been feeding. And of course, if you go back far enough through Antarctic history, you'll find periods of time when the temperature was much warmer. So we use that as an analog to try and understand what the snow petrels might have been feeding on then, and so how the ecosystem may change in the future.
2024 was the warmest year on record, and we had previous years being the warmest. It just keeps going. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this temperature rise and what we can expect from your different perspectives in the coming years here. I'll stay with you, James.
So the problems that we're facing are only going to be magnified. The risks that we see, the challenges that these animals are facing, the challenges that ecosystems face will only be magnified as we increase the global temperature. What we need to do is to try and reduce the amount of change that we see. We're seeing, as I said, the borealization of the Arctic. So we're seeing warm temperature species moving in. We're seeing similar things with trends of movement of those same prey species in the Southern Ocean. So we're seeing animals that should be much further north starting to encroach. Things like squid are starting to do really well in the Southern Ocean when previously they wouldn't be such high populations. And that changes what food's available for predators. And so some will start to really struggle.
So James, in terms of your findings here, how are they being received, and how can it reach policymakers?
So what we've seen this week, which has been fascinating, is the move that industry is starting to make towards net zero carbon. That's fantastic. It's a great movement, and hopefully that will help to slow down our impacts on the planet. But the climate crisis goes hand in hand with a biodiversity crisis. And what we're not seeing is governments, organizations standing up and saying that we need to protect the areas that we have left so that those populations that are struggling can start to recover. And so what I'd love to see this week is a push towards the 30 by 30 agreement to make sure that we start protecting the areas that many of these animals need.
Are you feel that you have enough platforms? I mean, this is a platform that we want to amplify your message, of course, but what do you need in terms of reach?
We need people to share the message. We need people to go out and start talking about it. It's great to see the discussion in Davos, but we need those to go beyond Davos, and we need business leaders to stand up and start, especially in the current political situation, to actually stand up and start making these changes. There's a business case to prevent climate change. Climate change is going to make business much riskier, but at the same time, if we carry on destroying habitats, we're only going to see more pandemics with other diseases popping out. So we need to start protecting our natural resources as well. After all, half of global GDP is reliant on nature.
Basically, every CEO of a major company should have a scientist as an advisor, and bring a person on their when they go over their entourage.
That would be fantastic, and a chief ecological officer as well as a chief sustainability officer.
Bring the person on stage.
Yeah. It's the training that just get mean that you can see things in nature that many people don't see. I can look out across Davos and you see beautiful mountains, but you can also see where trees have been felled or trees aren't struggling. You can see some animal tracks, but maybe not as many as you would expect because of the disturbance they have. Ecologists have a very different looking at the planet that a lot of people don't have that training, and so it's great to be able to share that with people and help them understand the way that the planet's struggling.
Thank you very much. So Mariah, from your perspective, what are we facing now in the coming year?
Yeah, what I've seen today and for the week at Davos is that we need to think globally but act locally. So a lot of communities already know and very much aware of what's happening, whether it's diseases or interpersonal violence. But we need to, again, de-silo it, just used to be my word of the day, to really cross culture the climate science and public health to really think about how can we be talking to each other more, because we know what's happening with the animals. I know what's happening with the communities, but how do we make sure that policymakers and other people can be invited to this work to move it forward? Otherwise, we're just kind of talking into our own communities, but then it's not going anywhere and pushing the needle forward.
Well, you need to be able to reach the hearts of people, understanding communications, not just the minds, and of course, come back to the beautiful big animals and also the health aspect. What's closer to yourself, my kids' health. How do you sort of maybe use is a bad frame of it, but how could you access the hearts of the people so reach all the way up to their minds and give traction by pushing these emotional buttons?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you? Yeah.
I mean, I think it's possible. I think if we lead with sympathy and understanding what communities need first, because they know what they need. So we need to be calling in indigenous communities, people who are marginalized, and asking, what do you need? What are the problems you're facing? And then thinking of how do we take it a step further and thinking about policy or thinking about structures and systems and take it from there. Listening to communities and needs stressed and underscored there.
Thank you, Mariah. So what is the role of media here? I mean, we're a media company. We're doing our best in this field. Specifically, we're focusing on climate all the time. So what's the role of media, and how can media be utilized in a better way for science to reach the hearts and the minds of leaders and people in general?
I think media's role here is to speak science to power. That's our tagline for us here at Arctic Basecamp.
Speak science to power.
Speak science to power.
That's good.
We know the underlying science, it's irrefutable. We know the things that we need to do to transition away from a carbon-based economy. And it's great to see businesses talking about this week and businesses showing. We had a great chat this morning from the CEO of IKEA, showing that actually they can increase profits while decarbonizing.
I was there too. Brilliant.
So we know we can do it, But what we need to do is to hold those businesses that are slow to move to account. And so that, I think, is media's role, is to make sure that everyone is on the same journey and everyone is pushing forward to see this change.
Thank you, Maria.
I would say keep inviting people to the table. There are a lot of unlikely suspects in this field. Public health may not be something that people associate with climate science, but just thinking about who's contributing to the work, maybe indirectly, but could have some value add to strengthen the message. I also think of things like social work or other health science things that are seeing the impacts of what you're talking about, James, in their communities as well, in their patients. So I think it's just reaching the audience a little bit wider and thinking about other disciplines that are also seeing the impacts of climate.
Me as one player, activists is another player. In my country, in Sweden, we have a global movement. Mothers Rebellion was founded by a psychologist, and rebel moms that they're called in Sweden. They actually they've been staging sit downs with the health authorities to enhance the awareness of the governmental institutions talking about public health to also incorporate climate. And it's been a very slow push. I mean, hard push, but it was difficult. But now finally there are some people working in this part of the government that are incorporating and started to think about these policy issues. And maybe we should actually inform the public about connection between climate and public health.
Yeah, and that's just a great example of, again, thinking about community. They know what they need and pushing those voices to the forefront and letting them have that platform. That's awesome.
It's a good story. Let's talk about something that might not be so positive, but we need to keep it in mind. And of course, many conversations in Davos has been centered around, or at least touching upon the fact that we have an entirely focus from the press of one of the larger companies. Company's not, well, it's a company in his mind, actually, so it's a Freudian slip. One of the larger countries that might be run like a company, United States, due to Trump. So he's already had left his executive order to leave the Paris Agreement, and also, of course, is focusing on more drilling of oil and gas. Drill, baby, drill. We all heard that sentence too many times by now. So how do we, as climate people, very concerned, you work in the field of science, so how do you face this? How do you address this fact that there is this country that is really crucial in terms of emissions and policies that might veer in the wrong direction? Maria, you're from Alaska. So it's your country.
I am. I'm thinking, and the first thing that came to my mind when you're asking is that I'm reminded that public health is purple. We need both sides to really be a part of the conversation. And I think it's really easy.
Purple as not being, it's not, you're not Democrat,
Right.
you have to be neutral.
Yes. And listening to both sides and making sure that we're including everyone, because that's how we shut down. That's how we stop listening to each other. And public health is too critical to do that. We can't do that. We have to have everyone there. And, I don't know if you'd agree with me, but I think it's not a matter of partisan politics. We have to be able to be inclusive to everyone.
But the time you need to be able to adapt to, or maybe put up resistance to or change this, that might happen, right?
Yeah. And I think there was a session today that even talked about you have to speak someone's language and thinking about how they're thinking about
Speak science to truth. What would you say? Science to power. Science to power, of course. Sorry, I interrupted you.
It's okay. It's just thinking about what other people's priority might be and keeping that in the forefront of your own communications and thinking about how can we find our own middle ground.
Thank you, Maria. James, what is your take on this?
I think it's really easy in the current climate to become polarized.
It's easy
to become polarized in the current climate.
Easy. I said not to my knowledge. No.
I think it's really easy to become polarized, to put up walls and become siloed, but nature influences all. It doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, you will remember childhood experiences of spending time in nature, or maybe adult experiences of spending time in nature. It's a great healer for ourselves, but it's a great healer for the planet too. I don't think it needs to be a political issue to say that we need to protect nature. If we know that by destroying ecosystems will unleash new pandemics. That shouldn't be a political issue, that's a public health issue. If we know planting trees will help to reduce carbon dioxide or make our cities better places to live in with less children dying, that's not a political issue, that's a social issue. So it is really hard to have those conversations. It is really difficult to stand up and talk to somebody who has a completely different idea of the world to you. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have those conversations. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't bring people together to try and make positive change.
Thank you. This morning, if we went to the same event, I think we did, you also listened to Bertrand Piquet. It's a Solar Impulse Foundation leader, and all. He's a doctor of psychiatry. And he said, if you can't reach the people you can't reach with, science and the need to protect the future for our children, you need to speak a different language. And he said, let's not talk about decarbonization. Let's talk about modernization. This is interesting, because who doesn't want to modern? Who nobody wants to be sort of a foot here and be old school and not following suit of the technologies that might save us. So you heard this obviously. So how was your response? Because I thought that was kind of interesting.
It's great. It's one of the largest sources of carbon emissions is household heating in the UK, and it's not it would be quite straightforward to transitioning houses away from burning fossil fuels.
Modern, yeah.
So we should just do it. We should make our houses more efficient. That's, again, a thing that improves people's lives, but at the same time helps tackle the climate crisis. I don't understand why those things aren't happening faster.
And there are many more examples actually that goes in line with that rhetoric of being modern instead of focusing on decarbonization, which of course is the objective here deep down. So a final question to you is, and it's a difficult one, but we've been sort of hovering around it, is how do we get more leaders in all fields to listen to you? How do we? I mean, what else? How do we help? How can all the people watching this broadcast, it's like, refer to science, back you up, donate? What can we do? Because I mean, we are depending on the policymakers and the business leaders listening to you. So how do we support you, James?
During the Brexit referendum, there was a classic quote from the Leave Party that they've had enough of experts. And that's a great way of dismissing an entire community. Scientists are the ones that are, if you like, at the coalface. They're the ones that are trying the best to try and understand the way things are working. And what we need is scientists that are able to then translate their understanding to the public. In preparing for coming to Davos, I was spending a lot of time thinking about how I was going to phrase things. And it's really easy to go into using your own native language, your own specialist language. And that's a great way of alienating people. So we need scientists who can speak plainly, and we need media organizations to help those scientists to translate that to the people that are going to listen and the people that are going to actually make those changes.
But also support scientists, right? I mean, you had to say that. I mean, if you didn't say that, say it. Yeah. There are many ways of donating to organizations that, that might not be science organization, but they're organizations that need science, like WWF and Greenpeace and all sorts of wonderful entities, right?
Yeah.
So Maria.
Yeah, I kind of want to pick a funding bit. Public health will never complain about more funding for research, just putting it out there. But I think just staying curious and staying on the grounds to what matters in the community, what matters to your neighbor, your brother, your sister, your kids, what's happening on the ground, and thinking about the priorities there and moving that forward. Because I think it's really easy as a researcher to call out the problems. Oh, the data is saying this, so this is the problem. Well, if the community doesn't feel a connection to that, or there's no relevance there, it's not going to matter. And that's how we start staying in these silos, and that's how we're not getting our message out. So really staying community focused and acting locally.
I have one final question, because it came to mind when you just spoke. Education. The importance of education, all the way down from the little toddlers to the seniors that are still lifelong education on that trajectory. So What is the importance of, and how do we get in more climate related, public climate related and climate research into the education?
You can't protect something that you don't know.
Exactly.
And we have a massive disconnect, especially in the UK at the moment, between children and nature. The way that society has evolved over the last 40 or so years means that parents are now scared to let children go out and play. And so today's generation don't have the same memories of just riding around in the local woods. They have screens.
This set of trees.
And we've, we send our daughter to an outdoor nursery. And that way she spends time in nature every day. Number of friends that I have that say, you can't put your child outside in Scotland. What about in winter? I'm like, well, we just wore clothes on her. It's not that cold. It means that at 5, she can identify trees. She can identify birdsong. She has this understanding of nature and these foundational happy memories of spending time in nature. I hope will seed a long life passion for nature that will help her to protect it in the future.
Thank you for pointing this out. This is important. Thank you. Oh, yeah.
I didn't know I went to outdoor school. So does my son. Funny. I think it's just taking it step by step. Little pieces like that really can make a difference. And also thinking about how can we share local knowledge, indigenous knowledge. There is a lifetime, millennia of knowledge there, and tapping into that because they know the environment just as well as researchers do. So just reaching out and building those bridges where we can.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Mura and James, for coming to the Arctic Basecamp We Have Time studio. We're happy to be share this wonderful space here in front of the Arctic Basecamp, and it was felt like very suitable scenery for you and your respective roles. So best of luck with your continued work. This has been a truly inspiring talk for me, from my side, to listen to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
And for all of you watching this, there is much more like this. You can watch this session. You can share it with your colleagues and your friends and maybe teachers in your schools to enhance this work. And you can also share stories, interact with their speakers and other experts on our platform, WeDon'tHaveTime.org. So please join us in this quest and support these fantastic people that do their best to protect the future generations' life and livelihoods. Thank you very much. And this concludes this broadcast here today from the We Don't Have Time studio. And as you understand, we're an organization we don't have time that is very dedicated to this cause of democratizing climate knowledge and spreading climate action. So again, please join us, and we'll see you again tomorrow because we have another day of broadcasting here from the Schatzalp station in Davos. Thank you for joining us.